think we'll just kick off the meeting. And I want to take this opportunity to say good afternoon to everyone and a warm welcome to the last Thursday. This is a space where we have ideas scratched, we have networks weaved, and movements do take shape. My name is Victor Kimanthi, and I'm thrilled to be opening this month's session. This is the very first episode of hopefully 2 in a series on networks and movements. And as we gather here today, in this, is it a network or is it a movement? I'm sure Mutile will be able to tell us that shortly. It's against a backdrop that feels, well, should I say, like some of our relationships, very complicated. It's complicated. 2025 has served up a world of dysfunction and disappointments. There's inequality, there's climate shocks, there's shrinking civic space collision. But that is why these sessions actually do matter, because the world feels very fragmented. Then it is the time for networks and movements to actually come and stick them back together. So I'm hoping that over the next 2 hours, we're going to explore the challenges. We're going to reimagine how these collectives can actually catalyze any kind of change that we want. So in today's session, we are going to be focusing on 3 main areas. One, we shall be setting the scene by looking at the theories, the practicalities, the challenges and the opportunities that this collective actually offer, these networks and these movements. And then we shall move on to be inspired by the show and tell from the MBFSI participants and the stories of what actually worked, what failed, and what surprised them. But here I just want to caution everybody, as human beings, we like focusing so much on the success, but a lot of lessons are learned from the failures. And failures are only a data point in your life. They are not the definitive part of who you are. So just learn from them and bring them out as much as possible for yourself and even for the rest of us to be able to learn from those failures. It's a case of falling or failing forward. And then, of course, we shall roll up our sleeves and have that interactive section that will be led by Ndaji and Triza. And here we shall have the voices that shape and help to validate what DD is looking at, what we are calling the entity to spectrum, ecosystem spectrum, entity to ecosystem spectrum. This is a tool that we are very excited to share. We shall just touch on it a little bit, but I'm hoping that this is not your usual webinar where you sit back and watch. In this space, we welcome you to lean in, spark any connections that you might see, and test your ideas together. So thank you very much for showing up, and thank you. We hope that you bring your curiosity, you will bring your energy, and thank you for making last Thursdays a gathering spot for network weavers, for community builders, and we're also hoping for funders and thinkers who believe that the future is a collective indeed. So with those few remarks, I want to hand it over to Mutile to take us through the next phase.
Great, thank you, Victor. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Mutile. I am part of the team leading Last Thursdays, our convening where we bring people who are thinking about the complex challenges that we are dealing with in the world today. And so this year we've been walking a journey of complexity. We've been thinking about how do we navigate changes that are very unprecedented? How do we think about interconnections? How do we think about root causes and the layers that just lie beneath the things that we see at the surface? And so just to give a quick recap of the previous series, we were talking about impact measurement and management, but particularly focusing on measuring in complexity. So as development or social impact practitioners, we are required to either report about our impact or even just for our own interest, we're keen to know whether we are indeed doing good in the communities we work in. And so I think the backdrop for this was just, the funding landscape has changed significantly. You recall at the beginning of the year, USAID was shut down, and lots of other funding agencies are following suit. So we are trying to understand what measurement in complexity might look like. For instance, now when your funding is withdrawn, we are presented with a pretty complex situation. So this series, as I mentioned, focused on, we used the impact at the helm framework, which is a tool that helps us to think around these issues. We talked about the orienting phase, which is the first phase that we see in this framework, where we are trying to understand the foundational aspects of our work. We are setting goals and we are defining, those initial ideas about our work. And so we ask questions like, what exactly do we need to measure? What indicators do we need? And how does the system work? So this is really just, we could call it setting the stage for ourselves in the context of impact measurement. And then the second phase is the navigating phase. Again, we are trying to understand a complex landscape. So we ask ourselves questions like, what is changing in the ecosystem? We made assumptions about our work. Do these assumptions still make sense? For instance, we assume that there will be funding for our programs. Does it still make sense to hold this assumption? And so we're trying to navigate this ocean of waves and so on. And then the third phase that is included in this framework is the sailing phase. This is a period of relative stability where you've figured out what the context of your work is. You seem to have got a hang of the system, but one thing is constant, and that is change. So what are the patterns and unexpected consequences that we are seeing as a result of our work, and how would we measure them? And then the last phase is the tacking phase, where we need to often make some necessary adjustments. So there could be external shocks, there could be new opportunities or new needs that are coming up. And so to continue on a straight path without acknowledging this would be like a recipe for failure. So what are we learning from this work, and how do we need to adapt and pivot? So just to cap it all off, when we are talking about measuring in complexity, there's a great quote by Julia Messing, who works at Acumen. And she says that people should measure a lot less, but do more with it rather than focusing on measuring more. And so that kind of lays the context as a continuation into today's conversation as we navigate complexity. So just to further build upon that, just some trends we see in today's socio-political landscape. This is not something new to any of us. We are largely aware of all of this. Victor mentioned fragmentation, where there's just a situation where things are broken up. A lot of separation of sectors, a lot of separation of actors and issues, and it's not very productive at all. There were seasons in humanity where this could have been useful, but at this point where everything is so interconnected, it doesn't serve us. And then there's quite a lot of dysfunction. We again have this inherent sense of things are not working. The systems are not working, people say all the time. So it could be the economic system, the political system, even health systems where it's so challenging to access health services. We're seeing people demanding a change in approach from top down to bottom up, a requirement of the sharing and distribution of power within community, within people. Again, inequality. There's been exponential growth and economic development over the last century, and yet we can't quite get a hold of the cause or what perpetuates wealth inequality. Why is it that some people continue to accumulate wealth while others consistently have to live on $1 a day despite the advancements that we are making as humanity. And so this is just a wicked problem that, that we are consistently facing. And then a shrinking civil space. This has been occurring over the last 3 or so years, where there's just a rollback on rights, a rollback on freedoms, and significant retrogression in terms of what people are allowed to do and how they are allowed to express themselves. Again, injustice, and along with these questions around who holds power, it seems that certain individuals are allowed to get away with unjust actions, while the rest, have to follow the judicial system and simply can do nothing about it. And then conflict, again, over the last few years, a lot of conflict in different parts of the world, in Sudan, in Gaza, and just a sense of, are we going back to a space where countries really just break out in war against each other? And so these are some of the things that we deal with on a daily. There are different aspects of it that we interact with, and it would be foolish to assume that these don't affect our work in a very direct and indirect manner. You could be focusing very clearly on a particular intervention in a particular community, but all of these things impact your work. And so we're trying to understand, if we as individual organizations cannot make a change, then perhaps we could hold hands as collectives, as networks, as movements, and just accelerate and innovate new ways of addressing this. And so what we are seeing is that it's all about relationships. And for this, I'll just draw a bit from network theory. Networks are a very normal part of human interaction, but this idea has also been significantly explored by mathematicians and by social scientists. Essentially, we're talking about groups of people, groups of individuals, groups of groups. And just for a quick definition, network theory is a multidisciplinary framework that we use to analyze and to interpret systems composed of interconnected entities or nodes. So the nodes are the little circles, and these can represent individuals, they can represent organizations or components in various contexts. So this could be the economic context, the social network context, ecosystems, and so on. So network theory really is all about the webs of interactions between different things. We talk about interconnected entities, but more importantly, we talk about the relationships and the strength of their ties. So as much as it's good to be connected to many things, how strong are those relationships between those many things that you are connected to? And so again, this is not new to any of us. We probably have been at networking events. We know that we have social networks, either on social media or offline. And so what we're trying to do with this is just make it a bit more concrete and realistic for us as impact practitioners, as a thing to harness in our work for more impact. And so just to talk about an interesting example, earlier this year, there was the conclave election. Robert Francis Prevost was elected the 14th Pope, Pope Leo the 14th. And it happened in a very interesting way. Obviously, this election happens under a lot of secrecy and a shroud of mystery, but there were some network scientists who conducted a study, and what they looked into was what connections existed between different individuals who were placed to become who were placed to be elected the Pope. And if you recall in the news, there was a lot of talk around this was very unprecedented. We didn't expect an American Pope to be elected. So how exactly did this happen? So these researchers mapped and examined how interpersonal connections among the cardinals can shape decision making. And yeah, so they identified some individuals who occupy central positions or influential positions within the Pope system and evaluated how they fit in the network. And so what came out was a structural analysis of all these interconnections. Interestingly, this study was published a day before the announcement or the election of the Pope. And it turns out that indeed what they found through their analysis came true, that the relationships and the strength of those ties really has a strong impact or influence rather on some outcomes, specific outcomes. So before I'll stop so that we don't get into the technicalities of network science. This is just to show visually what interconnectedness can look like and mean. I'll share a bit later the link to this particular study. It's a very interesting read. Again, just to emphasize that as much as the broadness or the breadth of networks is important, the integrity of those networks is much more important. Another example of networks in action is this mapping of the public health system in the US. And so you see the Public Health Agency as quite a core entity or node within the system, and many others that are connected. You can see some such as employers being connected directly only to the Public Health Agency and to schools. You can see others like nonprofit organizations have 3 connections, and so it varies. You can see hospitals have quite a number. And perhaps what to point out here is you can imagine how overwhelmed the people working at this public health agency might feel, having to manage all these different relationships and the complexities they bring with them. So don't you think it would be beneficial for some of these entities to interact among each other? Wouldn't it reduce the coordination, the time and effort required to bring different people, to bring different actors, different perspectives and priorities together? Because each of these has a very specific thing that they want to do. And the Public Health Agency seems to be the only one that can do all that coordination. And so that's what we call self-organizing in networks, this state where people begin to organically or even intentionally just connect amongst each other so that their impact is much more efficient. And so just a provocation or a thought for us, and I will invite a few reflections in the chat. How are you thinking about interconnections as a practitioner? Are there any practical things you are doing to organize and connect? Sorry. Can we mute that person, please? And then what networks are you building? If you're able to respond, reflect and respond, tell us what you're doing and how you're thinking about interconnectedness in your work, and perhaps which sector you work in. And you can just share those reflections in the chat, as I mentioned. But ultimately, what we are seeing increasingly is a need to connect different actors, different disciplines, and sectors for a more harmonized approach to these very complex issues that we're facing and that no individual can address on their own. In tandem with this is a lot of relationality, a lot of need to navigate power dynamics, to navigate different perspectives as well. And you know how these things are very entrenched in the systems and structures that we have created or that we find ourselves in. And yeah, just finally, we're just thinking about new ways of thinking, new approaches for how we embrace this kind of uncertainty that we're facing and how we look forward to the future. And just as Victor mentioned, we have thought through this a little bit. We've come up with a draft, I would say a draft of a framework, which we're calling the entity to ecosystem spectrum. And so this is just a spectrum where we're thinking about collectivization, essentially what characterizes different collectives. So at the center, you see an entity, which is an individual group or just an individual in themselves, an individual network even, which is seen to be autonomous. It holds resources. It often has a very particular purpose and influence on the system. And sometimes they operate in isolation, which is often the case. And then next is a network. We see this as highly relational. There are lots of relationships. It's interdependent, often quite decentralized, and it's multiple entities now working together in a less formal structure. So we just see connections of people doing things, but working together in some form. Next, we have a community of practice. This one is a bit more intentional around the work they are doing together. So it's very practice oriented. There are peers in the sector who are attempting to answer some fundamental questions, attempting to work on innovative approaches together. And so it's very collaborative, and there's a lot of sharing of knowledge through this community of practice. And then when we come to movements, we talk about a mass of mobilization. There is groups of groups of groups which come together with one overarching purpose. There is a specific goal they want to achieve. Perhaps the connections are not very intimate, but importantly, there's quite a huge group of people that are seeking some kind of transformation at a systems level or at an ecosystem level. And then finally, the concept of the ecosystem, which is where there are many systems working together. There's a lot of emergence, meaning things are just coming up, things are evolving almost without us knowing. A lot of interconnectedness, and now even more transformative than a movement might be. But just to mention, this is, again, because we understand complexity, this is not linear in any way. We're just trying to put some thoughts together around how collectives operate. It's not always a singular or defined thing. It really changes and can move from one level to the other. So as you reflect, thinking about your own work, I'm curious to see or to hear where you think your work fits in this ecosystem. And then for this one, I would really love to hear some thoughts from the floor. So where do you think your work fits along this spectrum if you are currently working in a collective?
Can I go, Mutile?
Yes.
All right. On my side, I think the community of practice, that's where most of my work falls under. We actually have a community of practice in Africa. It's called the Global Green and Healthy Hospitals Network. They've got a strategic partner situated here in South Africa, but it's a global community. And I think that's where most of my initiatives, most of my advocacies are falling within that spectrum of community of practice. And we are very specific. We are addressing the health sector, both the private and the public sector, because we are focusing on smart practices and just transition within the health sector. So that's where I believe I fall into. I was really hoping that I can make some strong connections during this program, that at least the work that you are doing on that side can be elevated also using the development dynamics platform. However, I'm not, we've done something, but it's not good. Hopefully with time, we can get somewhere. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Could I go?
Yes, please.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I think for me, it depends on the subject matter that I'm working on, because there are different levels at which we operate. So in the culture, social, cultural, and economic rights space, depending on who I'm working with, it would be either the individual as at a household level and helping them achieve what it is that they want to achieve, or it can be an NGO, or it can be a community in itself. It could be the business sector, or it could be a government. So at entity level, it just depends on what it is that I'm working on. And the community of practice and movements, I think development dynamics fits very, very well in terms of this space and me being able to move from entity into networks and community of practice and also the movements. Ultimately, from this and us having graduated, I think we're going to build an ecosystem that now will cover Africa and say, okay, from the rural areas of Botswana, be it communities, be it NGOs, or be it businesses or governments, at the end of the day, we would be able to move into these different spaces in different countries through the network and community of practice that Development Dynamics has put together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your interventions, Ndanji and Tepo. Would anyone else like to share about your experience or perhaps even your understanding of this? Maybe it's completely wrong and you have a different perspective. We welcome those as well. I wonder if I can call on Rosalind Owusu. Would you mind sharing a few thoughts?
Sorry, I've just joined in, so I'm trying to catch up.
Okay, no problem. Felsha, Achie. Okay, I'm not sure everyone is able to speak, but you can feel free to leave your thoughts in the chat as we invite, as we start to invite the MBFSI participants. I see a hand up. Please do go.
Hello everyone. Hi, this is Valeria from Let Up Impact. I'm sorry I had some network challenges, so I think I joined left and then I joined again. So I just wanted a clarification on that image that I was seeing before, maybe because I just missed it. In this image, is this saying that network, community of practice, movements, and ecosystem, it's a continuity, so one evolves into the other, or they're independent entities, the way you see them, the way a movement is, or the way a community of practice is within the ecosystem? Just a clarification on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valeria. I see Maxi would like to speak. Would you like to respond?
You see, I could. You're lying. Anyway, I resonate with the question that you're asking, Valeria, and nice to meet you again. We don't see it as a, what do you call it? It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily build on each other. You could be a movement that has a couple of communities of practice that are evolving from an entity level and at the same time building something larger in an ecosystem. So this is our attempt in, we do a lot of movement building. We've done now 3 or so masterclasses and like annual masterclasses with some of the participants who will be speaking today and various others. And we have seen the need to at least have something structurally, and there is a lot, and we are going to be inviting colleagues in the sector to sort of feed into this. The components that we see for each can be found in the other components, but maybe in different sizes and scopes. But when we think of it, and this is not it in its entirety, we see an individual organization or project as that center. And we see the ultimate goal to be something that is transformative in an ecosystem kind of way. And we try and just build blocks. Most often, some of those blocks and what are now in the concentric circles will end up running over. We've been doing a paper on this internally, and we have seen that at times it's issues to do with budget. At times it's issues to do with the length of an assignment or a project that determine where it falls in the ecosystem. At times is just who is leading and how do they show up. At times they could show up as a thought leader and therefore are influencing the ecosystem. At times they could show up very internal and therefore be influencing at what is more in the smaller circles. Yet those smaller circles are what is most important to continue influencing the bigger circle. So it is something that we actually want to work with sector players, people who are in different movement building or entity formation or communities of practice, networks. We are fortunate to be supporting a couple of either networks or communities of practice, and we can tell what differences they are. And we're also very fortunate to be working with particular entities and also ourselves, forming a few things that principally some of these components apply. There is a bigger document that is we love to share openly, so we can share just as plain as it is with our immediate internal thoughts, because that's one of the things we are hoping to get from this conversation today. People who are willing to say, can we shape such a thing and see how it influences and builds on what they already exists. Yeah, so that's my response. And really, again, nice to see you here.
Thank you so much, and nice to see you here again.
Great. I wonder if there are any more immediate questions, particularly on this spectra, as we invite the MBFSI cohort to present about their work and learnings.
So, Motile, maybe I was just going to put it to the group. And my question, I think I put it in the chat. What actually happens, because in the spectrum, it is not linear. I think it's very fluid. You can move from the other one from the other. What happens when there is failure or fragmentation to any one of them, or one grows maybe bigger than the other? Maybe that is something we should consider, because if you are a small group and you grow a little bit bigger, then do you become something else? If there's fragmentation simply because of ideology for whatever reason, then what would happen? Do you still stay at that natural state that you started off as?
Thanks, Victor. Great question. And I think that requires a bit of reflection, at least speaking for myself. Is there anyone who has immediate thoughts?
The entire part of when you think collectivization, one of the things you're trying to do is remove silos. So because silos make it difficult to really influence at the ecosystem level. And silos end up bringing more duplication. They end up bringing, at times, even confusion. But and that's why governments at times exist. That's why technical working groups at sector level, exist, so that everyone can be able to see that there is a bigger part of the ecosystem that you're trying to shift. My part is this, not to be biblical, but the the idea is what Nehemiah's people were trying to build. Everyone is building in their corner, but what we want is a fortified wall. So every entity, movement, and across the spectrum, everyone is sort of required. And if folks or entities or movements are not pulling their weight enough on a particular component, then the collective win doesn't happen. And we can tell that even from our political systems, from our economic systems, from various angles, including the work that we do. So the harder part of this is that it requires skills that are not replaceable by anything else, because it is fundamentally about relationships and how to cultivate those relationships to ensure that they continue to grow, weave, self-organize, and become even more than initially ideated. Yeah, I hope that's useful, Victor, for you.
Great, thank you. Please feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat. But now we do have time to hear from the cohort that just graduated from our Movement Building for Social Impact Masterclass. And we will start off with Triza Mudambo. She will give us a quick introduction and tell us about what they learned, what their final project was about, and anything else that interests her. So over to you, Triza.
Hello everyone. My name is Triza Mudambo. I hope I'm audible. Was part of Group 1. It was a very interesting experience being part of this process. We learned a lot. We learned about movement building, ideation, and we even learned about the different stages of movement building. We did, as a group, we did a discussion paper on the Aba Women Riot. And one of the reasons we did this was because women have been marginalized in historical narratives. And women have been very, very instrumental in our societies, in the African societies. So the Aba Women Riot was started by a widow, an Igbo widow called Nwerua. And the reason why she started the riot was because the British colonials wanted to start a head count to count the population. And the aim of that was to actually tax women. And they were already overtaxing the men and the boys in the community. And in Igbo culture, it was a taboo for women to be taxed. And one of the reasons why she started it was because she was already a widow. She was struggling to provide the means to take care of her family, and she actually started it to retaliate towards the colonial forces. And an interesting thing, in the Igbo community, they had functional native courts even before the British colonial system. And they used to have a system where even the women could come together in decision making, come together to contribute. They would leave it was more of a communal setting. But and they would select their leaders amongst themselves. But when the British colonial system came, they started having agents. They selected chief warrants, who are basically agents of the British colonial system. And they were not serving in favor of the Igbo people or the Nigerian people in general. So this lady single-handedly rallied 25,000 women in the Igbo community, and they attacked native courts, European-owned factories, and also warrant chiefs. A very interesting story about how one of the warrant chiefs is that they made one of them fall off the bike, and the end result, eventually they had all the warrant chiefs submit their caps. they completely actually finalized the warrant chief system. It was abolished after all the chaos they caused, meaning it was really productive. It was a productive movement, and it has been titled as a riot. It was not a riot because they were fighting for their needs. And eventually the British system considered some of the claims that they have. So why does it matter today? It matters today because women in Africa have been marginalized and have not been represented in our historical books, in academic papers, and in political spaces. Most of the time when you are referring to women, you're in historical settings or narratives, you always see them as people who've stood back, not participated in war or in important conversations. Let's go to the next slide, please. Insights. So insights from the Grey literature, something that we got from the Grey literature. Just a minute, my screen has hanged. Okay, yeah. Insights from the Grey literature. While formal colonial archives framed about women as a riot, oral testimonies and local storytelling in grassroots, I'll quote state different. I'll quote this: we did not carry weapons, but we carried our dignity. We gathered in numbers and sat on them because our power was in our unity. Oral count from an Oloka elder. So the imagined themes and root causes, colonial disruption of indigenous systems. Remember, the Igbo community already had systems before the colonial system, and it was already working for them. The imposition of the warrant chief system and accession disrespected the Igbo dual sex leadership, sidelining women from governance. Something that I found very interesting because it breaks the stereotypes that we have in the African community that only men were in leadership positions. And the second one was economic and cultural disempowerment. Market women were heavily impacted by colonial economic restructuring and loss of traditional roles and agency through tradition. Resistance took the form of sitting on a man, a ritual of public shaming through chants, songs, and symbolic occupation, showing how tradition was used to subvert power. And the only reason they did that was because most of all the warrant chiefs were men. This is no, I'm just saying it's no, there's no gender connotation like to this. It's just that at that time it happened that men were the warrant chiefs, which destabilized their cultural leadership systems. Yeah. Kindly go to the next slide. Beyond the protest, embedded systems of resistance. So the women were able to mobilize each other, and were able to form established institutions, marketing associations, and kingship networks. The movement was not only active in Aba, it became widespread and was able to influence women from around the areas. And this network functioned as community assemblies, forums for decision-making and political consensus, trust-based systems built on shared cultural norms and mutual responsibility, cultural sanctuaries, spaces for emotional and strategic preparations, song, ritual, and stories. And something interesting we found when we were going through this, that this was not the first protest that they did. There was a previous protest 2 years before this when a woman, a pregnant woman was beaten by her husband. And it really upsetted the Aba women. And 200 of them actually left their homes as punishment as punishment to teach the men in the community to treat them better, and later on they came back. Yes. And these mechanisms have proven that mobilization has been, is actually part of us and movement building. Kindly let's go to the next slide. Sorry. Or what gets measured as what truly matters. Colonial records of the Aba women revolt reduced it to a riot, like I said. But what went uncounted were the restoration of women's voices in public life, the preservation of communal dignity, the mobilization of thousands without centralized leadership. And the women of 1929 didn't fight for the policy outputs. They fought for autonomy, cultural survival, and justice. The success was rooted in collective power, core-based organizing, and moral authority. There are no indicators in the modern sense, but they were and remain essential measures of impact in any African resistance movements. I've noticed that oral literature is something very key in accounting for movements in Africa. And most of them go unnoticed because they are orally passed down to us. And I believe that we need to invest more in archiving oral literature to keep this in account. Through oral stories, rituals, and symbol acts, communities preserve what colonial metrics ignored: healing over hierarchy, survival over surveillance, story over statistics. And an example of an oral quote: they counted our bodies, we counted our daughters. Paraphrased from feminist retelling in Southeast Nigeria. Can you let's go to the next one? What's next? What was the aim of this? What's next? We need to invest beyond the visible, fund documentation, support oral history projects, because it's part of us as Africans. It's what we are, it's what makes us. Support narratives of sovereignty, resource local scholars, elders, and artists to tell their own stories, trust the unconventional. Movements don't always fit into log frames, but they shape the future. Movements as architects of new worlds. The women of 1929 were reimagining the model collective accountability, non-hierarchical leadership, and gender. Just governance before long, this became global framework. They didn't respond to crises, they anticipated injustice and acted. Let's build new financing pathways that value memory, imagination, and moral authority as much as strategy and scale. Let's invest in knowledge as a foundation of action. I thank you. I like to finish there. Yeah, thank you. That's what we came up with.
Thank you, Triza, for representing Group 1 and just sharing for us at DD a different context rather than the East African one. We'll now move to Group 2, and the presentation will be done by Ajak Atem Ding. Just a reminder, we have 10 minutes, so please help allow us to remind you to be mindful of time. Ajak, feel free to proceed.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Ajak Atem. Simply one. Okay, so we look at the movement mainly in South Africa. That was the case study that we picked out to talk about. Simply like take it through
Ajak,
maybe.
we can't hear you very well.
Yes. Are you getting me?
That's a bit better. Thanks.
Hello?
It's a bit choppy, but you can proceed.
Yes, hello. Are you able to get me?
Okay, it's not very clear, so maybe we can go to
Hello.
group 3 and then come back to you once you have figured out the audio.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
simply we talk about the apartheid movement of South Africa. So you remember we go back to movement. This is like this is the
Jack,
organizing
if
and
you allow me, I
mobilizing
can't
of
hear you very
communities
clearly.
towards maybe achieving a common goal. Yes, please go back to the slide.
Jack, if you don't mind, we'll come back to you. We are still not able to hear you clearly. So we'll go to group
Okay.
3 next and then come back to you. Yeah, thanks. So Ndanji Lesetedi will be representing group 3.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
All right, let's do this. Well, good afternoon. I'm representing group number 3, and our presentation is basically on reclaiming ancestral economics, women's liberation through Borongwa stewardship. Borongwa stewardship, Borongwa, first and foremost, is a Setswana word which depicts people serving because they belong. It anchors development on humility. It's about ethical stewardship of resources and intergenerational accountability. So it borrows from the most famous Ubuntu that has been, for lack of a better word, bastardized in development, where we focused on I am because we are, but then the ego got caught in the way and there's no unity in communities. So that's why we're saying maybe we should move on to other concepts such as Borongwa. Ours is an African-centered advocacy for gender justice, ethical prosperity, and intergenerational repair. All right, thank you. Next slide. For a bit of background information, African women have historically led in farming, caregiving, and community leadership. This is before colonialization, and pre-colonial systems upheld matrilineal governance, shared stewardship, and Ubuntu values. So matrilineal governance, in essence, is about the women being in authority to govern over resources and determine what the future holds for communities. Unfortunately, colonial and post-colonial disruptions led to economic exclusion and marginalization of women, which is why we actually took the time to pen this presentation. Shall we move on, please? In terms of the context and the problem, African women face intersecting barriers in land, finance, care, and digital access. If they were a bone or if there was a skeleton, we would say it's a quadruple fracture, because there are 4 areas which are interconnected and women are lagging behind. These exclusions in access to land, finance, care, and digital access sustain political, economic, and cultural inequalities. I don't need to dwell on or expand on the exclusions, political, economic, and cultural exclusions that women face in Africa. The most affected population in terms of our target area are the rural women, caregivers, youth, and informal workers. We all know that African women are the backbone of many communities, and current solutions overlook indigenous models and lived experiences. So what we're saying is our great-grandmothers, at the end of the day, were brought up to be leaders. But unfortunately, through socialization and this monster called patriarchy, which is an excuse by men to keep women suppressed, has really affected the development of women. And what we're saying is we need to be able to go back to our indigenous models and lived experiences, such as Borongwa and Ubuntu, and actually expand them into economics that link to feminist movements and decolonialization. All right, thank you. Our insights from the gray literature actually shows that there is recorded testimonies from Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Kenya that show resilience, cultural leadership, and matrilineal governance. Community models where women usually took center role would be the Nhimbe community model in Zimbabwe, the Kotla system in Botswana, Muitea system, and the Queen Mother tribunals. In terms of these community models, they have shown that power and care are tools for resistance and transformation. So the roles that women play predominantly are the backbone of us being able to show resistance and also transformation. The insights offer blueprints for decolonial community-rooted reform. So basically what we're saying is the evidence exists and we just need to plug into it and go back into who we were, our identity before we were colonized. Now, the movement as infrastructure, how do we organize beyond the moment? Ladies and gentlemen, there's no questioning the power of cooperatives and the cooperative movement in Africa. Kenya has led the movement in terms of the power of cooperatives. And what we are advocating for is, let us drive our women towards building cooperatives. So in Kenya, we have the Muungano Women's Housing Cooperatives, which saw women organizing to secure land titles, co-finance low-cost housing, and resist forced evictions. So women standing up for themselves. The cooperatives anchor financial literacy, collective ownership, and participatory planning. It is linked to regional organizing under the Slum Dwellers International Network, and the role the infrastructure plays is it creates community saving systems, secure tenure, and long-term urban inclusion, which are core and key to women's development. Borrowing from Zimbabwe, we have the Nhimbe Seed and Care Cooperatives, which are rooted in the Shona tradition, and the Nhimbe fosters collective farming, child caring, and ritual labor sharing. Women organize to conserve indigenous seeds, share harvest, and lead community planning. All right, next slide, please. In Botswana, the women's basket weaving cooperatives, which are predominantly found in the areas around the Okavango Delta, are women cooperatives that are formed to preserve ancestral crafts, generate income, and teach younger weavers. Botswana is famous for its baskets. Yes, baskets are a part of Africa and everybody's tradition and culture, but specific to Botswana, these have been seen to be economic drivers. So these cooperatives actually co-manage production, sales, and exhibitions with global reach, and have also got UNESCO recognition. I think that's what sets the Botswana basket apart from any other basket in Africa. UNESCO has recognized the culture and the heritage behind it. In some communities, basket weaving is linked to health and education funding. The money raised from selling of the baskets is channeled back into healthcare and education. And the role of the infrastructure is it combines culture, heritage, and cooperative economics into sustainable livelihoods. So the reason why we're saying cooperatives is if movements collapse, then who holds the line? Women-led cooperatives do, quietly, durably, and daily. History in Botswana shows that women's cooperatives have stood the test of time, just as in Kenya. So when we move from margins to matrices, what we are actually advocating for is we need to humanize the GDP and actually start advocating for the Human Development Index, which captures issues around quality of life and not just the number of schools or the number of clinics that are being built, but the quality and the accessibility in terms of people living with disability and the distance. From Zimbabwe, looking at the Nhimbe seed and labor cooperatives, which are ancestor rooted and are based on communal labor and seed banking. Our matrices, when moving away from GDP and talking about the HDI, is food security, crop diversification, and community resilience. In Kenya, the Green Belt movement is a women-led reforestation movement funded by Wangari Maathai. The matrices, ecological renewal, which is very, very important, empowerment, dignity, and land healing. When we take it to Botswana, women-led cooperatives that produce hand-woven baskets, the matrices that they cover are cultural preservation, community income stability, intergenerational knowledge transfer. So what we're saying is we should stop counting numbers, but actually make sure that the numbers count. So how do we intend on investing in the intangibles and fuel the imagination? Well, first and foremost, we need to reframe the core question, which will actually dictate how we intervene. We need to move from what's broken and how we can fix it. Donors need to stop funding problems. They need to be funding the dreams and aspirations of the communities. What visions can the community grow with? What dreams? And why it matters, funding problems alone define people by pain. Funding dreams, affirmations, and imagination, dignity, and agency is actually the better way to go. Next slide, please. All right, on my last slide, ladies and gentlemen, examples of the dream capital or the funding structure that we want to see is robotics labs in township schools, obviously that target girls, youth-led art collectives in Accra, clean energy startups in rural Botswana. These are not side projects. They are the future in motion. And how do we fund the future? We need to talk about venture philanthropy, which is now about giving the communities the means of production so that they can sustain themselves, giving them a hand up and not a hand out. We want participatory grant making, multi-year unrestricted grants, and a revenue share or catalytic capital models. Ladies and gentlemen, in parting, what we are calling for is from charity, we need to move from charity to co-creation, from aid to agency, from crisis response to dream capital. Impact is not just what we solve, it's what we make possible. Thank you very much on behalf of Group 3, ladies and gentlemen. Asante sana.
Incredible. Thank you, Ndanji and Group 3 for a really insightful presentation. If there are any questions, you can keep them in the chat and hopefully we'll get a chance to address them. I wonder if Ajak is back with sound. Ajak, could you just let us know if you can hear us and if your audio is working now?
Yes, hello, please.
Yes,
Am
thank
I
you.
audible enough?
Yes, that's great. Please do.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm representing Group 2. Our case study was mainly the apartheid movement in South Africa. You know, Africa has a lot of different movements. So we happened to select apartheid movement out of the Mau Mau rebellions of Kenya, and then the Green Belt movement, and then the Maji Maji, and then the apartheid movement. So when we talk the apartheid movement, there was a movement in South Africa. Next slide, please. So apartheid movement was a institutional system of governance that was mainly altered based on racial segregation. When you look at the apartheid, it was administered by the British colonies. Where it was administered by British colonies, that was around 1948 to 1990. So mainly here in the apartheid region, in the apartheid movement, what happened was that the blacks were being oppressed. So when the blacks were oppressed and abused. So what triggers them? They started, it triggers them to start coming up with what we call the anti-apartheid movement. So meaning after finding what they call the common problem and the challenge that triggers them, they came up with what we call the anti-apartheid movement. So this resistance took so many years of cases, brutal treatment to the Africans and deaths. So when you look at the apartheid, it was led by, next slide please. So mainly it was segregations. So you find the blacks were being segregated, yet like you find that the blacks were segregated and they were like the owners of the land. You find that they were the owners of the land, but you find the minorities are the one being dominating the land. They were being abused in a lot of things. So this triggers a lot of this trigger blacks to come up with what we call the anti-apartheid movement. So you find that this is their common challenge that really triggers them to come up with this apartheid. You find like in South Africa, the students came up with protests in position of Afrikaners. You find in Afrikaners, it was a language. It was a language for the white, the minorities. So students there came up and oppressed them. You find also like Africans were being economically exploited. So they were exploited economically. You find they were also being classified as the second-class citizens. So you find also some of them were working and they were being paid low. So these common problems and challenges triggers them to come up with this anti-apartheid movement. Next slide, please. Yes. So who led the movement? So we mainly know that Nelson Mandela led this movement. So you find Nelson Mandela, when he initiated, he was the eye of the needle of the movement. So you find there were people behind him, the likes of Desmond Tutu and the like of Oliver Tambo. But it didn't went that smoothly. You find that we hear that Nelson Mandela was arrested for 27 years. He was in prison. So you being the leader of the movement, and when you're in prison for 27 years, so this did not really push African blacks maybe to get demoralized or to give up on the issues affecting them. So what happened? Knowing that their leader has been arrested, they kept pushing and they kept advocating for their right. So they did not stop there, despite the fact that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. They were not demoralized. They did not give up. They still push on and advocate until he was released. Next slide, please. So simply what happened mainly here, you find the lesson that we can learn now from the anti-apartheid movement. What can we learn? So the movement can be sustained for a very long time as long as the common problem will be in existence. So the community will keep on revolting until it is resolved. So what happened? The collective effort. People had the collective effort. You find that people came in together and put on effort so that at least their issues are addressed politically, economically, and religiously. You find that there is suffering and sacrifice. People like Nelson Mandela, they sacrificed. If it was not sacrifice, Nelson Mandela would not come up and then say, we are supposed to lead this protest or we are supposed to lead this movement. You find students sacrificing their lives. So these are the lessons we learned. Like for instance, this draws me back maybe to Kenya. Like we had the Gen Zs protesting, and most of them we find students protesting. So these are the lessons we drew back from such a movement back in Africa. Also, emotional intelligence. You find like when Nelson Mandela was arrested, people did not feel that like the fear or the fear and the courage to continue the movement. This is one of the lessons that we could draw from that. We can also talk of the proper organization. You find the movement was very organized, like the proper organization. If the ringleader was arrested, then you'll find that there will be disorganization because who will be the next to lead? Who will be the next to advocate? Who will be the next to mobilize people? But still, because of their proper organization, it became a success. You find the movement have a lifetime with clear strategies. So how do you organize movement? You come up with strategies, how to organize the movement. They can transition to some other forces. You find the anti-apartheid movement, after its success, Nelson Mandela became the president. He became the president. So because of that, or what the strategies they put into place, movement are historic. Of course, they are historic. Up to now, we still talk about them. We still up to now we still remember lessons that we can draw from them. Generation to come, they will have to use such movements or such movement or protests to learn from them. So that makes them very historic. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's briefly what we discussed in group 2.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack and group 2 for your work. Next, we'll go to group 4. Eric Muhandia will be representing on behalf of the team.
Hello, how is everyone? How are you? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity, and so I'm really excited about the development the dynamics class because I learned a few things that have kept me going, and as an activist and a visual storyteller, I've gotten an idea of how I need to manage my content and collaborate with other entities to just form a sustainable movement. So today I'm going to talk about a very controversial movement. It's not really an official. It's still coming up. So it's about what it's about. I could say it's less than 2 years old. So this is the Gen Z movement, and people are really skeptical about this movement because how it operates, what motivates them, their current belief, and you know, what really pushes them to act. So that is the background of the Gen Z movement. So Kenya has been characterized by recent erupted protests, which started last year after the proposal of the finance bill. So after the proposal, people are not really happy about it, and young people stormed to the streets after they felt that the members of the house were trying to, fail them. So they resorted to using social media to push for hashtags and used every means to make the public know that they are indeed rejecting this bill, and they are going to do everything it takes to make sure that it doesn't pass. So yeah, so as I said, it is really a controversial movement. And thanks to Ajak Deng, you said that the apartheid movement was a little bit organized, but this one is not really organized, but it is really it's really volatile. It's making waves, and it's very progressive. So they're really addressing the issues around youth unemployment and uh, the rising cost of living. So nonetheless, the group itself, it has a decentralized nature, which means they are leaderless. They don't have a leader, so they're just pushing their agenda using their platforms. And the objective is just to make sure that the leaders are accountable, and to push for uh, leadership development, to make sure that whoever that they are electing do the work that they are elected to do. So can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so insights from the Gray literature. So, the Gen Z movement have mostly used digital mobilization tools to push their message. So they have made their message so easy to interact with. So they made their objectives into simple, understandable memes, or as you can see here, translated finance bill summaries and GPT style tools guided civic understanding. So we had different translations of the finance bill, which made sure that everyone understood what was going on in the country and why they had to reject the bill. So there were several risks associated with the engagement. So the movement faced certain risks like abductions, digital harassment, and surveillance. So people are not even safe. Even when you go to protest, it was not even safe for you anymore. So yeah, and it's still going on in the country. So we still have a long way to go. So emergent themes was decentralization. So as I've said, they had a decentralized system. There was no leader, and uh, there was so much misinformation where the government used fake news to discredit the movement and just neutralize their impact. So um, the reflections on power and agency. So here we discussed how the youth can leverage digital platforms and amplify civic awareness in the future. So among the topics in our masterclass was digital use in the civic space. So we are hoping in the future the Gen Z movement will come up with um, a better way of presenting their views, or trying to maybe hack the media and you know make a better use of the media, and not this controversial type of movement that we have seen in the past. So yeah, examples of structures. So there can be durable structures that can be made to make sure that the movement stays sustainable and impactful, such as civic education platforms like this one, Civic Link. There's so much civic education platforms where the youth can get information about their democratic rights and how to peacefully participate in democratic processes, not just the protests. So another thing is mentorship networks, um, and digital spaces where young people can learn leadership skills and strategies, just to make sure that their movements are impactful and radical. So how can we build trust and accountability? So the movement uh the movement was, as I said earlier, the movement was very progressive, radical, and digital. So they had live streams, which provided accountability for some oversight some oversight agencies in Kenya, such as IPOA, which is an oversight that ensures that the police are actually doing what they're meant to do. So these videos were really useful and helped for accountability and trust. Next is crowdfunding, which is simply gathering funds for the affected victims and how to ensure that the movement continues to be progressive. Next slide, please. So these are the metrics in the movement. So how do we measure the impacts of the movement? So there are traditional versus community movements. So some of them are numerical, but some of them are unquantifiable. So these traditional metrics include protest turnout. So there were a series of protests, and you could see a difference between the turnout of the protest based on how it was digitally pushed or sponsored. So there was also media coverage just based on the digital tension, and also there was the next is community valued metrics. So this I said they're not really quantifiable. So they're just the care. You would see there were even some police officers who are trying to help the injured victims. So there's the church, trying to just show that collective power and to change the narrative that not that indeed everyone was against the government and the rising cost of living everyone experiencing. So emergent metrics, yeah, as I said earlier, there's that just mutual support from uh, various entities, the crowdfunding, and also the lawyers really came in handy to just make sure they are bailing everyone out and they had all the information about all the abducted people and all the people in custody. So another emergent metric from the movement was the digital resilience of the young people, as they had the ability to educate and translate every fact, to different languages so that everyone can understand. So even everyone, including children and the old, could just get the picture of what the movement was really about and how they are willing to address their objective. Next page. So I think, yeah, I think that's it. So it was just that controversial movement and how they use their digital tools to address the objectives and what they can do to improve that movement. And yeah, moving forward. I mean, thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for talking about what is happening currently. So very pertinent and close to many people. Now we'll go to group 5. Charles Msimbi, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mutire and the team and my colleagues from Group 5. I think you can move to the next slide. Yeah, so in our group, we shared about how to get funding, more especially from the movements that normally emerges with the youth in the context of Africa. So yeah, so over 60% of Africa population is under 25, and the continent future relies more on the leadership of the youth. Yet the philanthropic support often excludes informal youth movements and the emerging movements to rigid requirements and short project-based funding. So we focused our grade literature on the funding, more especially on the philanthropic, like the foundations, like Bill Gates foundations. Yeah, for youth in Africa, it's quite a challenge for the movements to get supported because their focus in most cases, from what we observe, is based on the short term, and in most cases, the funders' alignment with the movements, they differ in most cases. So why this issue matters in the current social or political context? So Africa's leading social justice, democratic governance, climate actions, and economic forum. but limited access to resources due to exclusive philanthropic funding structures. In most cases, they hinder our capacity to influence the policyholder, and at the same time also even to sustain long-term impact. In most cases, there's a weakening democratic process and inclusive development. So who is most affected and what the gaps in existing solutions are? So youth-led movements face funding exclusion due to lack of maybe sometimes registration, sometimes it could also be like administrative capacity, leaving a gap in a long-term support for grassroots initiative. So philanthropic institutions can support informal youth movements, addressing funding gaps and enabling long-term growth to foster systematic change and transform communities and governance across Africa. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so insight from the grey literature, what was captured in the grey literature, many youth-led groups face exclusion from funding due to complex requirements and lack of formal structures. There's a clear need for flexible, long-term support that strengthens diverse youth leadership and enables sustained social change. So youth movements face exclusion due to donor requirements that prioritize formal structures and short-term funding. This creates tension between the need for accountability and the flexibility required to support grassroots youth-led innovations. So like any evidence quote or pattern from the community organizing, as one youth leader expressed, we have the idea and the energy, but the system isn't built for us, capturing the frustration shared by many grassroots movements. This reflects a recurring pattern of exclusion, whereby traditional funding models fail to align with the Hello, Mutile.
Sorry, let me just share my screen. I think
Okay.
our tech support may have dropped off, so just give me 1 second. All right.
Yeah, so as the youth leader expressed, we have the idea and the energy, but the system isn't built for us, capturing a frustration shared by many grassroots movements. This reflects a recurring pattern of exclusion, where traditional funding models fail to align with life realities and long-term goals of informal youth-led initiatives. So youth-led movements are reclaiming power and agency by organizing outside formal systems and challenging structural barriers. Through resilience and grassroots mobilization, they are driving social change and political change despite limited funding and recognition. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so organizing beyond the movement. So we see like examples of long-term structures, like maybe we can have like an alternative, like feminist funds, like community assemblies and digital sanctuaries. Youth movements can adopt innovative models like feminist funds, community assemblies, and digital sanctuaries as alternative to traditional funding approaches. So these long-term structures provide a flexible, community-rooted support, foster collective leadership, and create a safer space for organizing. By embracing such models, youth-led initiatives can build sustainable movements that are resilient, accountable, and better equipped to drive a lasting social change. So we also see that movements hold community trust by prioritizing transparency, inclusiveness, inclusivity, and the consistent engagement with their members. They build durable accountability mechanism through collective decision-making process, regular feedback groups, and shared leadership structures that ensure everyone's voice is heard and respected. By embracing these practices, movements create a strong bond of trust that sustain their legitimacy and effective over time. So great literature as a mirror of deep infrastructure. Great literature, such as testimonies, internal reports, and reflections, serve as a mirror of the deep infrastructure within movement. It captures the often unseen practice, value, and system that sustain organizing efforts over time. This board of work reviews how movements build trust, adapt strategy, and maintain resilience beyond public movements of protest or visibility. So provocation, if movements collapse, who hold the line? So challenges us to consider the critical role of movements, play as protectors of justice, equity, and community voice. It raises urgent questions about sustainability, responsibility, and the need to invest in the long-term infrastructure that enables movements. I cannot see below the, okay, that enables the movements to endure and continue holding power to account. I think you can go to the next slides.
As we proceed, there's just 1 more minute, so maybe you can speak just to the main points for the next slides.
Okay.
Have we lost you, Charles?
No, I'm still there. I'm waiting for the next slide.
Here we are.
Yes, it's still the old one. No, we're not moving to. Yeah, okay. Let me conclude. As I have already stated, it's quite a challenge for movements, for youth in Africa to get funding. In most cases, the donor and the entity who are requesting the funding, we have got the priorities which differs. So what we are advocating is to make sure that the youth are being taken into consideration when the funders are making the decision. I think that's the whole point. Yeah, let me stop it there.
All right, thank you so much, Group 5. We now have time for some discussion, and that will be led by Ndanji and Triza. If you are still there, please let us know if you can hear us, and then you can take it away. Victor will be supporting with this part.
Thank you, Motila. I think Triza had requested to go first. So Triza, please take it away. We don't have a lot of time, so maybe we'll just manage maybe 1 question from each.
Okay. I was going through, okay. Just give me a minute. Okay, so I'm going to be taking you through the discussion space, and we are doing it with Lesedi. So the question you're going to go through, from your experiences, if you're in your network or movement, what are some of the vital leverage points that can unlock big challenges in complex social challenges of today. I'll try and rephrase it. Sometimes big changes come from small shifts in your work or organizing. Where have you seen a small move create an unexpected ripple effect? Yeah. This is an open space. We are supposed to contribute. Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa. Maybe you can just say it one more time so that it can sink in as people think.
Okay. Let me rephrase. Sometimes big changes come from small shifts in your work or organizing. By organizing, I mean movements in the respective communities you're in. Where have you seen a small in quotes, move that has created a ripple effect? Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa. Would anyone like to pick up this question? Something that you have reflected upon previously, or something that comes to mind just immediately, where a small action causes a ripple effect.
Okay, I'll go through if you allow it.
Yes, please.
So one of the small initiative or action that we took, but that had a major difference in one of our advocacy, which was the green energy solution, was the issue of switching off the lights every time when this business day, when we knock off. Now, as an EHP, I do have the measurement of how much energy we consume on a monthly basis. Now, that small act of just switching off the lights when we knock off had a major impact. It's a small thing, just switching off the light, but it had a major impact in ensuring that at least we reach that goal of minimizing our energy consumption as a healthcare sector. So that's what I can think of. It's a small thing, just switch off the light, but it has a massive impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I could also give an example from my end. In my team, we had a problem with reporting, our reporting culture. So we created a small system, started small, where every Monday in our WhatsApp group, we just list things we are working on. Yeah, just that before signing up on ClickUp and the like. And it worked eventually. It worked because it was a challenge the first 3 days, but the ripple effect is that everyone automatically, without being reminded, reports on the tasks they need to do or things that urgent things that are associated to organization. Does anyone else have something to say before we go to the next discussion question?
I think I'll cheat a little bit here and pick on what Ndaji was presenting when he was presenting. I think the last slide when he asked us just to rephrase whatever it is that we are approaching a problem. It's not always solving the problem, but what kind of impact that we make. So it's those small little changes of how you change your perception of something, and the way you approach that thing totally makes it look very different and makes it more actionable, so that you're not always thinking that, yes, you're operating from a defeatist kind of viewpoint, but always looking at it at what is this change that you can do, and you're focusing on the change, not on the challenge.
Well, I guess Victor has covered the next question that I was going to ask, so we can close. But I think with what Victor is saying, it actually leads me to the question that I think it's the most important thing, how do we effectively measure the success or impact of a network or a movement, especially when their contributions are often indirect, systemic, or take a long time to be seen? What matrices beyond traditional project outputs might be useful? So I think this question actually ties with what Victor is saying in terms of what are we looking at? What are we focusing on? What is the outcome that we want to achieve, as opposed to what are the actions that we are reporting on? So I think I'll open up the floor to answers to the question.
So the question here is about what metrics are we measuring in movements, in networks, in collectives in general, where we're not focusing too much on outputs, but more on the broader impact that these collectives are making. I wonder if there's any MEL practitioner in the room who might have some thoughts to share. May I call on Nicholas Makwana? If you're able to speak. Or anyone else with thoughts. I think lots of the group's presentations highlighted some new ways of thinking about metrics that matter. We saw a number of comparisons between traditional metrics and community-led metrics. There was mention of value systems. So instead of measuring how many people perhaps attended a protest, how have these people's value systems changed in regard to politics? For instance, we've talked about narratives being one way of measuring impact, narrative change. Is there anything else that is coming up with regards to this?
Again, I'll borrow from Daji's, and maybe we need to redefine some terms. How do we then define success first? If we know how we're defining success, then the metrics might also change from outcomes, whatever it is that you're moving on. But when it comes to metrics, because in movements and networks, it might take a long time. And is it always we should be able to be cognizant of matters to do with contribution and attribution. Sometimes it is the attribution to it. It's not 100% because of the movement or the network, but it can be attributed to it. So something like trust levels, because of this movement, maybe our trust level actually increased in a certain way. Maybe our connectivity to one another also was enhanced. Or maybe even the diversity, maybe it was just purely men who are in this movement or men who are always in this network, but now because of what we've done, it has been opened up now. Both genders can actually take part, and also things to do with the collaboration. What is the evidence that we see? Are members co-creating more in this when it comes to these initiatives? Are we sharing the resources more easily than we did in the past? So I think with movements and networks, it is more, again, like Daddy said, let us look at those definitions, how we define those success, what is it? And unfortunately, if it's coming from the West, they will define it for us. But if it is locally generated, then we'll be able to come up with our own definitions.
Thank you, Victor. Great reflection there. I see Nicholas in the chat says that metrics shouldn't be about the number of X, Y, Z, but should be about the change seen and the power transfer in X, Y, Z. So we did mention that power structures and dynamics that are entrenched could be one way that we understand change or impact of a movement or a network. Okay, we can have perhaps one or two more questions as we begin to wrap up. Teresa or Ndanji? if any of you is speaking, I think you may be on mute, so we can't hear you. Okay, perhaps there's an issue. Victor, any more questions coming from you or reflections?
I think I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, and what was it? The issue to do with the failure. So in a world rapidly and constantly changing, how can networks and movements actually become more agile and adaptive? Is there any room for learning, experimentation, and how does failure actually play into the long-term effectiveness of either a network or how you
We seem to be losing Victor a little bit there.
fail when it comes to all these movements and networks.
I think I captured at least the first part where you talk about how adaptable and adaptive are we, how agile are we as a measure of effectiveness. So just there is a need for reframing how we conceptualize of progress in our work in organizing, not so linearly focused on, again, as we've mentioned, outputs, but more about how able are we to respond to emergent issues. And that would be a very interesting angle to explore further. In the chat, Valeria says that some measures can also be on the influence of the movement, on the influence the movement has on the individual members, mindset shifts towards collaboration, for example, or value-centered approaches, rather than monetary to advance change. It depends on how each movement sees success or impact, as Victor was mentioning. Again, a very holistic and systems-oriented approach. Maxi says, I think failure is only failure if lessons are not harvested and learned from it. So, in essence, we should probably be incentivizing lessons learned from failed networks, COPs, and movements. I think something that, at least at DD, we have been experiencing is that learning itself is an output. So when we do theories of change, for instance, we have this very detailed visualization of what we are going to do and how we're going to get there. I think what we are seeing is that learning through experience is an output. It's not only part of the process of the work we're doing. All right, I would like to invite any other reflections from the floor with a few minutes on the clock left, or questions that you would like to seek clarification on. Okay, it looks like there are none. With that, we are happy to draw to the end of today's discussion on networks and movements. We hope that this has been insightful, and we are keen to connect with you in the next episode, where we will further unpack the entity to ecosystem spectrum. And we would be keen to get your thoughts at some point before then. Any questions, any things that you think really don't make sense are very important to us. And so with that, I perhaps could invite Maxi if you have any final remarks. Otherwise, I wish you a very good rest of your day and see you in the next one.
Yeah, just to say congratulations to the MDFSI team cohort of 2025. In working with you, we have also been able to refine the MBFSI offer because of all your contributions And yeah, you will be soon receiving your certificates. And we look forward to continuing to collaborate in different other ways, including and not limited to this last Thursdays, maybe the affiliate network and any other areas of exploration. Thank you. Thank you for leading this.
Could I just have a quick one? I think on behalf of all the participants, it's very important that we recognize development dynamics and recognize the great work that it is that you're doing. I think for me personally, this has been an opportunity to grow. It's not every day that I get to hold a mirror in front of me and ask myself, what fires my passion? So I think from the beginning of the course, you know, when we went into our own mindsets and told our stories of how we got to where we are, that was the beginning of the change in the mindset. Because once we learned why we do certain things, then we were able to understand and actually able to channel the passion in the right direction. So I think on behalf of the participants, it's just to give you feedback as development dynamics to say, great stuff, team. You guys are pioneers. And in terms of the amount of noise that I'm getting from people in Botswana who are interested in the course and Southern Africa, let us open up collaboration and let's see you guys being able to come to places like Botswana to host master classes. It's important that you leave the comfort of Kenya and actually come to Southern Africa and see the work that we do so that you can appreciate the power that you give us through the beautiful work that you do. Thank you very much to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Ndanji. Very much appreciated. And thank you also for the invitation. All right, with that, we're happy to give you 4 minutes of your afternoon or evening. I wish you a very good week and weekend coming soon, and hope to see you in the next one. And thank you as well to our MBFSI cohort and the representatives who took us through what they did in their groups.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And as they say, you don't have to go home, but you can stay here. So we'll see you on the next time.